Welcome. Every year, the Wichita affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness holds a presentation on the Sunday that begins Mental Illness Awareness Week, which the first full week of October, which is observed nationwide. Our goals are to educate people about serious mental illness, to let people know that services are available for individuals with mental illness, and to reduce stigma. This year, our speaker will be Eric Smith, a consultant, mental health advocate, and nationally recognized speaker who will talk about his experience with his own serious mental illness, his subsequent referral and treatment through assisted outpatient treatment, or AOT, and his recovery. This is his story.
Thank you. My name is Eric Smith, and I thank the wonderful people of NAMI Wichita and their supporters for affording me an opportunity to share my journey with you. I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizoaffective disorder, both of which are forms of serious mental illness, also known as SMI. For many years, from the time I was a teenager through my mid-20s, I did not adhere to a prescribed psych med regimen, not necessarily because I didn't want treatment, but because I didn't believe I needed it and did not understand my diagnoses or the fact that I was ill at all. How ill was I? Well, at my most symptomatic, I believed I was working with the FBI to prevent World War III. I heard voices. I believed I broke secret codes that didn't exist. Despite all of this, I certainly didn't believe I needed psych meds due to a severe mental illness. In fact, at my most symptomatic, I believed the government would be able to hear my thoughts if I took my psych meds, so I refused to take them. Quite ironically, I now take my psych meds and I make sure the government hears my thoughts through testifying and advocating, as I am now a mental health advocate who largely focuses on removing barriers to timely and effective treatment for SMI. The type of treatment that I needed and eventually got. The type of treatment that should be accessible and available to other people if and when they need it. In short, I'm now successfully living with severe mental illness, but getting to this point was a long journey filled with a lot of chaos for my family and I. And my unmanaged SMI was also a heavy burden on others like police, FBI, Secret Service, mental health professionals, hospitals, my teachers, and various other treatment providers and people. Now, let's turn back the clock to get a better picture of where I'm at now and how I got here. As a child, I was generally happy and had a lot of friends. I enjoyed playing piano and played basketball every chance I got. In short, I was no different from many other kids. But something changed when I got to middle school. Nobody knew that change would be followed by such turmoil. For the first time in middle school, I was no longer making excellent grades. I went from a straight A student in advanced classes all throughout elementary school to barely passing some of my classes in 6th grade. And then I started failing homework assignments and exams soon thereafter. I still had friends and still enjoyed playing piano and basketball, but school, something at which I excelled for years, became a distant interest for me. And there were many times I wasn't interested in it at all. I passed from one year to the next without being held back, but barely. By the time I got to high school, I became even less interested in my studies and occasionally ditched school altogether to go enjoy my day at movie theaters and malls. I began using drugs, mainly marijuana to start with, but not a lot of time went by before I also started using LSD and ecstasy. About halfway through my junior year in high school, I dropped out and got a high school equivalency degree, known more widely as a GED. It's worth mentioning here that my parents were doing everything they could to help me and continue to do so. When my grades first started slipping, they hired a tutor and drove me to and from my tutoring lessons. When it became apparent I was having issues in need of counseling, my parents took me to see a mental health professional, realizing that whatever was going on with me likely required the involvement of an expert. Some kids aren't so lucky, with loving parents like I had, who were doing everything they could to get me help. But that's the thing with mental illness, particularly severe mental illness like I have. Love is not enough to manage the symptoms of the diagnosis. My drug problem persisted and got worse. I was still regularly using marijuana, ecstasy, and LSD, but also got into hallucinogenic mushrooms, cough syrup, cocaine, and painkillers. I want to be clear here that no one else in my family was drinking or getting high, and that I was the only one who was. And as I look back on this time, I realized that a lot of my drug-seeking behavior was about trying to manage the chaos in my mind, which was entirely rooted in severe mental illness. You may have heard the term self-medicate before, and if you haven't, the meaning of self-medicating is about how some people seek out drugs or alcohol, not necessarily as a means to get high, but as a means to quiet inner turmoil associated with mental illness, or in my case, severe mental illness. By my late teens, I had already been a patient of a few different mental health professionals, a psychologist and multiple psychiatrists, with none of them being able to help manage what I was bringing to the table with my SMI. I had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and none of the medications I received under the treatment of these professionals had any real lasting impact to control my problematic symptoms. At that time, my most prominent symptoms were some paranoia and mood fluctuations of ups and downs like one could expect with bipolar disorder. It seemed like no mental health professional could help and no medication could help. In 2006, I voluntarily entered into rehab for my drug problem, which at this point was out of control, and I'm lucky to be alive. I got into Xanax, and there was a time at my worst with it that I took about 60 milligrams in a 24-hour period. If you're wondering how I survived, I'm right there with you. I have no idea how I lived through that. For anyone listening to me speak right now and who hears how many milligrams I took and considers that as a challenge to beat, please don't. It made me very ill, and I almost died. Leading up to my choice to enter drug rehab, I remember sitting out on the balcony of my apartment, smoking a cigarette, listening to music on my laptop, and I was fading in and out of consciousness from the Xanax. Some time went by, probably several minutes, because I woke up to the smell of burning plastic. I had passed out, and the cigarette fell out of my hand and landed on my laptop, and the cigarette was melting part of the laptop's keyboard. It must have also landed on my shirt because my shirt had a hole burnt through it. From this event and others around it, I was able to convince myself that I had a drug problem, but I was not yet prepared to entertain or agree with the idea that I had some form of mental illness. This is because I had seen a number of mental health professionals over the years and had been prescribed a number of different psych meds over the years, none of which worked. The way I saw it, if all of those psych meds I took didn't manage my symptoms and didn't do what they were designed to do, then I must not have the conditions or illnesses they are designed to treat. So I made it through drug rehab and survived addiction, but the tumultuous journey was far from over. I want to make it very clear that defeating addiction is a huge deal and cause for celebration, but there was no celebrating for me because my severe mental illness was the worst it had ever been and seemed to be getting worse from 1 month to the next. I was experiencing paranoia and then bouts of insomnia, then times where I was sleeping far too much. My ups and downs were also pushing beyond previous mood swings of my past. I wasn't sure if all of this was just me getting used to living life without drugs, but I was sure it had nothing to do with mental illness. Even so, I would occasionally take my prescribed psych meds, but did not ever adhere to treatment. If you're wondering why I would take psych meds if I didn't believe I had mental illness of any kind, that's a great question. Not much about what I did or didn't do at that time in my life was rational and rooted in thoughtful deliberation of any kind. If I did something, it was usually out of impulse and feelings in the moment, and that includes taking psych meds. The only med I recall taking regularly was Klonopin, but I think that was the addict in me appreciating the feeling that accompanied it and was not the result of me wanting to adhere to treatment, as is exemplified by the fact I didn't much care whether or not I took my other psych meds. My psychiatric state steadily worsened over the next few years, but I functioned well enough that none of my psychiatrists floated the idea that I needed inpatient care for my severe mental illness. That is, until August of 2009, when I was arrested for trespassing at my parents' house. But let's back up just a bit to explain how things got to that point. In mid-2009, I was more psychotic, delusional, and paranoid than ever before. I was about 3 years sober, but drastically declining in my ability to understand and perceive reality. This is the time I thought I was working with the FBI to help prevent assassination attempts on world leaders. and that I had broken a code that allowed me to prevent World War III. This was a time where I was staying awake longer than I ever had before, even longer than when I was addicted to cocaine. After staying awake for a few days, I drove to my local FBI headquarters to tell them all about the code I had broken and the assassination attempts that could be prevented, which to this very day is something I look back on and am blown away about how insane all of that is, despite it seeming not at all insane to me at the time. By this point, it became quite clear to my parents that I was dangerously removed from being able to process and interpret reality. So they contacted my then most recent psychiatrist for guidance. That particular psychiatrist had terminated services with me because I was rude to him and his staff. That particular psychiatrist had terminated services with me because I was rude to him and his staff, but I'm not looking to make excuses for how rude I was at the time. It was my unmanaged bipolar disorder that was causing me to act out in such a way that the psychiatrist terminated services with me. And it is that psychiatrist's prerogative as to whether or not they want to keep me as a patient. And they didn't want to keep me as a patient. Not knowing what else to do, my parents spoke with this psychiatrist and explained how things were worse than ever before. That psychiatrist's advice to my parents was that the best way I could get the treatment I needed at that time was if I was arrested, hopefully for some low-level offense. And then if luck was on my side, I'd be transferred from jail to a psych hospital. Around this time of my life, this timeline, so to say, I had shown up to my parents' house while clearly psychotic. And while it was clear to them I was psychotic, it was not clear to me. I thought I was totally sane, but I was far from it. My parents were concerned about me and concerned about themselves as well, even though I don't have a history of violence. Their concern was rooted in the fact that I was so far gone from reality that I could be capable of anything as a result of how psychotic I was. They called the police, who came and told me that I had to leave my parents' house, and if I came back, I'd be arrested for trespassing. Not long thereafter, I showed up again at my parents' house. I had no fear of being arrested because I believed my elevated status working with the FBI would mean police didn't have any authority over me. But of course, that was not real, even though I was totally believing it to be true. And because I had already been warned by police to not come back to my parents' house or I'd be arrested, big surprise, I was arrested for trespassing. I was then in jail for about a month, receiving no medication or treatment of any kind for my bipolar disorder. And each day to the next was marked by further descent into madness. I didn't have access to windows for the bulk of my stay in jail, and I remember thinking I failed my mission as a clandestine government agent, and World War III had started. I kept picturing apocalyptic scenes of the city that my mind was painting for me, and I started to believe I was being kept away from windows so I wouldn't be shocked by scenes of nuclear fallout in the distance. When I was about to be released from being incarcerated, my parents were on the phone begging the jail not to release me because of how psychotic I was. A person who worked at the jail told my parents that when I got out, I could panhandle, use that money to buy my psych meds, and then sleep under a bridge. Luckily for me, the judge who would eventually become the person who oversaw the legal side of my inpatient and outpatient orders sent a court liaison to the jail to speak with me to find out if I would be a good candidate for psychiatric hospitalization and outpatient care. Because I was believed to be a good fit for inpatient care and potentially for outpatient care thereafter, I was transferred to an inpatient state psychiatric hospital from jail, followed by an assisted outpatient treatment order when I was ready, without having to panhandle for my sanity, which was the jail's discharge plan for me, if you could call that a plan at all. I was incredibly close to being released from jail without medication and in the most psychotic state I had ever been. So releasing me from jail in that state of being was not a plan, unless the goal of that plan was for me to end back up in jail or dead from some likely tragedy stemming from my psychosis. The stars aligned, and I was stabilized in a hospital setting for 3 months, and then released into an assisted outpatient treatment order, also known as AOT. AOT saved my life. I've said that many times over the years. When I say that, it makes good sense to explain what AOT was like for me and what services I received with AOT. When I entered into AOT, I wasn't exactly sure what it was, which is partially related to the fact I was exiting a state hospital after being a psychiatric inpatient for 3 months, far removed from comprehending reality. After being in AOT for a few weeks, it felt like I was becoming a person for the first time since I was in my early teens, when my SMI symptoms started showing up and putting barriers between me and my ability to perceive and live in reality. So to be clear, I was stabilized as a psychiatric inpatient, and then AOT began to recalibrate my entire existence so I could safely live in the community. AOT helped accomplish this by utilizing a civil court order and collaboration between various professionals. Exactly who's involved on an AOT treatment team can vary by geographic area, and the elements of AOT can also vary by geographic area. That said, my AOT treatment team consisted of a judge, psychiatrist, social worker, nurse, and attorney, all working together with each other and with me to help me defeat anosognosia, which is a term that is used to describe changes in brain functioning that can result in people with unmanaged SMI not being able to recognize and understand they have a severe mental illness and are in need of treatment. This is such an important thing to understand, because if people are unable to recognize and understand they have a severe mental illness, then what motivation is there for them to seek and adhere to treatment? That certainly applied to me because I saw it like this. I'd been prescribed and taken numerous psych meds over the years, and none of them had any lasting impact. So again, and I said it before, but I'm saying again because it's worth repeating, if none of the meds I took served to manage any of the symptoms or illnesses they were designed to treat, then I certainly must not have any of the diagnoses they are designed to treat. That seems quite logical, but make no mistake, the large bulk of my thinking and behavior stemming from SMI was not quite so rational. With so many years of me not believing or understanding I have a severe mental illness, I needed to understand and learn how to manage my SMI. And that is exactly what AOT did for me, and exactly what AOT does for others who need it, like I needed it. The psychiatrist on my AOT treatment team ran medication management. The judge on my AOT treatment team ran the legal mechanism of the civil court order. The attorney made sure that my rights were not violated, and he was present at each AOT hearing to help accomplish this. The nurse helped by getting blood work from me that was needed as part of the medication I was prescribed. The social worker on my team is the person with whom I had the most interaction and face time, and helped me with a number of things. For example, sometimes the social worker helped drive me to and from my psychiatry appointments. The social worker also helped me apply for college when I was healthy enough to pursue that option, and it was a goal I wanted to accomplish now that I was sane enough to pursue my goals. Beyond that, the social worker also drove me to my college of interest to meet with the school's student disability advisor to have a discussion about what I needed to do to get accommodations related to my SMI. As I mentioned, all of these different professionals and their various contributions, you can see the value and necessity of different disciplines and roles collaborating together to help someone like me who is looking to transition toward a healthy life from all of the chaos associated with a history of unmanaged, untreated, and undertreated SMI. Some people listening here might still be curious about why AOT is so special, and I can address it with this. Before AOT, I had seen psychiatrists. I had been in counseling. I had been prescribed medications. I'd been before a judge. I'd interacted with attorneys. But there is something special about how AOT brings all of these different people together with a common goal of collaborating with one another and with AOT participants. This team is accountable to each other and to the AOT participants. The AOT hearings I was required to attend started out once per week, and as time went on and I was more stable, the frequency of those hearings was gradually reduced to once per month. Each AOT hearing included a collaborative focus on how well I was doing and on how well my medication was managing my symptoms. If I was taking meds as prescribed but decompensating, which did in fact happen, then the AOT treatment team would weigh options such as a change in dosage or a change in medication. At my AOT hearings, the Judge Kazin, would ask, "Eric, are you taking your meds as prescribed?" And I'd say yes. And I have memories of sitting there wondering how he or anyone else could know if I was telling the truth. Oh, but they would know. If any of you have ever seen someone with SMI not on meds or on meds that aren't working, you understand it can be pretty apparent when someone is not sane and they are presenting as a danger to themselves or others. In hindsight, when I was asked by a judge during my AOT hearings whether or not I was taking my meds, looking back, it was probably more about if I was appearing to be sane than whether I said yes or no. These AOT hearings are civil proceedings guided by evidence-based practices and an understanding that the criminal justice system and voluntary services could not and did not meet my mental health care needs. Voluntary services are incredibly valuable for people who are not too sick to use them. And I wouldn't expect anyone who has never been as ill as I was to fully understand that. And I hope no one is as ever ill as I was. But the reality of things is that there are people who are as psychotic as I was. And we need things like inpatient care and AOT to help us find sanity, freedom, and happiness. My AOT treatment team successfully helped me change from someone who didn't really believe I was ill with some form of SMI to someone who fully accepts it, and someone who can't possibly imagine not making treatment adherence an ongoing priority in my life. The magnitude of that point cannot be overstated, because let's talk about what my life looks like in recovery. With large thanks to AOT and finding medication that manages my SMI, I have regained my health and my life, a new life, a better life, once thought distant fantasy by me. AOT took me from a path of delusion and danger to graduating magna cum laude with a BA in psychology. And now I'm a graduate student in school on track to finish near the top of my class at the end of this semester with a Master of Social Work degree. I'm diligently preparing to help other people as I've been helped, because I believe all people can attain some sort of recovery. I understand the reality is some people end up recovering more than others, and some people end up not getting to a point where they get a chance to recover. For everyone, though, I recommend not giving up hope, because there's no guaranteed path to succeed and no guaranteed path to recover, but giving up is a guaranteed way to fail. As I reflect back on my life, I'm reminded of a time when I was speaking at the Texas State Capitol building about my journey through SMI, and someone in the audience asked me a question. The person asked me, when did I decide to take the reins in my treatment of SMI? I responded with a brief story, explaining how I was incarcerated for my unmanaged SMI, followed by being a psych inpatient who had people assigned to follow me everywhere I went to make sure I was not posing a danger to myself, and about how hospital staff were instructed to examine the inside of my mouth after I took my psych meds to ensure that I was taking them as prescribed and not hiding them to spit out soon thereafter, and about how my treatment plan as part of AOT required me to meet with a judge and the rest of my treatment team. I ended my answer to that audience member's question by explaining I did not take the reins in my treatment for SMI. The reins were handed to me when I was ready. And for people like me, people with SMI who are too ill to recognize they need treatment and care for their illness, that is the reality of things. The reality is people like me, prior to managing my symptoms, of course, we are so out of control and so unable to live lives where we're not posing a danger to ourselves or others, that other people who understand our needs step in and take the reins to our lives and then hand those reins to us when we're ready. I know that can be a controversial point of view, especially for people who have not been as ill as I was. But having personally lived it, I can tell you that an AOT treatment team saved my life and then handed me the reins to my life when I was ready. People like me need mandatory treatment in the face of anosognosia, which I assure you is very real. Looking back, it was terrifying to know all of my family, all of my friends, medical professionals, and everyone else who interacted with me could clearly see something was wrong while I was simultaneously convinced I was totally sane. You may find some people saying that people like me who refuse treatment do so because we just don't want it, and that our rights should be respected if we don't want treatment. But someone who's refusing treatment because they believe taking a pill will allow the government to hear their thoughts and won't drink water because they believe poison has been added to it is someone who's not living in reality. And that inability to understand reality can often manifest itself in dangerous ways, as it did for me. People need to drink water to survive. People need to eat food to survive. And I only was eating butter for a period of time and not drinking water. That's posing a serious danger to myself. So I was that person who refused treatment. I was that person who thought the government could hear my thoughts if I took my meds. I was that person who wouldn't drink water because I thought it was poison. I was that person who had no control over my life until people who understood the complex needs associated with my SMI stepped in and did their jobs. And now I am that person who accepts treatment. I am the person who makes sure the government does hear my thoughts when I testify and discuss things with them. And I am that person who has recovered to a point where I have control over my life, with the hopes that talking about it can help other people do the same through changes in policy, practice, and also in motivating others to not give up hope. In no way am I suggesting the journey that I or anyone else is on is easy. In fact, I'm here to tell you it is not easy. It is hard. But there are steps that can be taken to move in the right direction with all issues related to mental illness. If you are feeling mentally unwell and you have the ability to recognize this, please reach out to a trusted treatment provider. If you have a loved one or friend who appears to be mentally unwell, please speak with them about the benefits of seeking help. And if your loved one or friend is as ill as I was and unable to understand their illness and need for treatment, please consult with treatment providers in your area about how you might be able to help, such as petitioning for AOT or inpatient care if the situation warrants those actions. I did not at all like being hospitalized, and I didn't immediately love AOT, but I love my life right now. And my life wouldn't be what it is without inpatient care and AOT. I reflect on things like this. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizoaffective disorder when hospitalized as a psych inpatient. I dropped out of high school and got a GED, became addicted to various drugs, both prescribed and illicit, was arrested and put in jail due to my severe mental illness, and was committed as a psychiatric inpatient. Then AOT comes along as a safety net. And despite being a high school dropout, once hooked on drugs and diagnosed with SMI, I beat all of those odds stacked against me because AOT was there for me. Without AOT, we know what that trajectory looks like. We hear it all the time. We see it in the news. That was a downward spiral that wouldn't have stopped until it put me 6 feet under. Love yourself and others enough to make mental health and wellness a priority for you and for those you care about. And to those of you out there who don't yet have the ability to understand you are ill, that can be a scary thing to think about. I know this because it was scary for me. Help is out there, and I hope you're able to get it. Thank you to NAMI Wichita and to all of you for graciously giving me your time to hear me share my journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Such an inspiring story. In Wichita, Kansas, we do have an outpatient treatment court which provides a source of treatments that utilized by Eric. For more information, contact NAMI Wichita at 316-686-1373 or email us at info@namiwichita.org. Thank you. This concludes our Mental Illness Awareness Week presentation. Thank you so much, Eric. I do appreciate your story.
Thank you, Lynn.